Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The phone call felt ordinary enough at first. It was Mark, my husband, on his way home from the office. "Honey," he started, his voice already carrying that slightly distracted tone it got when he was juggling traffic and work thoughts. "Dave's coming into town next week. Needs a place to crash for a few days while he sorts out some business." David, my brother-in-law, Mark's younger brother by a good 5 years, and someone I'd always found, well, hard to read, not unfriendly, exactly, just distant, wrapped up in his own world, which seemed a million miles away from our quiet suburban life here in Oakwood Creek. He was the adventurous one, the one who'd bounced between cities, jobs, even continents, while Mark and I built our steady life, raised our kids, now grown and flown, and settled into the comfortable rhythm of middle age. Visits were rare, usually just quick drop-ins during holidays, filled with polite conversation that skimmed the surface. Mark adored his brother, saw him through rose-tinted glasses, maybe, remembering the childhood hero rather than the somewhat elusive man he'd become. "Oh," I said, trying to inject some enthusiasm I didn't quite feel into my voice. "Okay, for how long?" "Just 3, maybe 4 nights," Mark assured me. "It'll be fine. Sarah, good to catch up with him. Properly." I murmured agreement, mentally rearranging the guest room, thinking about groceries, wondering if Dave still had that weird aversion to anything green on his plate. It wasn't that I disliked David. I just didn't really know him. He existed in anecdotes Mark told, stories from their youth, or vague updates about his latest venture. Usually something involving tech startups or consulting gigs that sounded impressive but ephemeral. When he arrived the following Tuesday, dragging a battered suitcase that looked like it had seen more airports than I'd seen birthdays, he seemed much the same. Tall, leaner than Mark, with restless eyes that scanned everything but rarely seemed to settle. He had the same sandy hair as my husband, though threaded with more gray at the temples, and lines around his eyes that spoke of late nights or maybe just more intense living. He greeted me with a quick, polite hug that felt slightly awkward, offered a bottle of decent wine, and then immediately fell into easy banter with Mark, revisiting old inside jokes and shared memories. I busied myself making coffee, feeling like an observer on the edge of their tightly knit circle. The first evening passed predictably. Dinner, talk about David's vague business, reminiscing about their parents, Mark dominating the conversation with his usual cheerful energy. David listened more than he spoke, offering short responses, his gaze often drifting towards the window, towards the darkening trees in our backyard. I tried drawing him out, asking about his travels, but his answers were brief, almost evasive. It wasn't rudeness, more like a deeply ingrained habit of privacy. Mark, bless his heart, didn't seem to notice, happy just to have his brother there. As I cleared the table, Mark announced he had an early conference call and needed to prepare. "You two keep chatting," he said, clapping David on the shoulder before disappearing into his study. An awkward silence fell. David swirled the remains of his wine in his glass. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, marking the seconds. The house suddenly felt too quiet. So I started, wiping down the counter. "Oakwood Creek must seem pretty sleepy after, well, wherever you've been lately." He looked up, a faint, almost surprised smile touching his lips. "It's peaceful," he conceded. "Different." His eyes met mine directly for the first time that evening, and I saw something unexpected in them. Not restlessness, but a flicker of weariness, maybe even loneliness. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that familiar guarded look. "Mark seems happy here," he added, shifting his gaze back to the window. "He is," I said softly. "We have a good life." Did I sound defensive? Maybe. David just nodded slowly. The air between us felt thick with unspoken things, the comfortable quiet of our home suddenly charged with a low hum of tension I couldn't quite name. It wasn't unpleasant, more curious. I found myself wondering about the man behind the polite facade, the brother who seemed both connected and entirely separate from the life Mark and I had built. The next day, Mark left early for work, leaving David and me to navigate the morning. I'd expected David to hole up in the guest room or make himself scarce, maybe head out for his mysterious business. Instead, I found him in the kitchen when I came down, nursing a mug of coffee and staring out at the bird feeder in the backyard, a thoughtful expression on his face. He'd already made a fresh pot, a small gesture, but somehow surprising. "Morning," I said, pouring myself a cup. "Sleep okay?" "Like a log," he replied, turning from the window. "Your guest bed is dangerously comfortable." He smiled, a genuine smile this time, and it changed his whole face, softening the lines. "Glad to hear it." I laughed lightly. "Help yourself to breakfast. There's cereal, yogurt, fruit. Coffee's perfect for now." "Thanks," he said. We drank our coffee in a companionable silence for a few minutes. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt less awkward than the night before. "So," he said eventually, leaning against the counter, "what does a typical day look like for Sarah when Mark's off slaying corporate dragons?" The question surprised me. Mark usually described my life, my part-time job at the library, my book club, my gardening in broad, affectionate strokes, but David's question felt more direct, more genuinely inquisitive. "Oh, you know," I began a little flustered. "Tuesdays are library days. Today. Well, today I was planning on tackling the rose bushes before they get completely out of hand." David's eyebrows lifted. "Roses? You're a gardener?" "Trying to be," I admitted with a self-deprecating shrug. "They fight back more than you'd think." He chuckled, a warm, pleasant sound. "My landlady in Seattle had prize-winning roses. She used to talk to them, swore it helped. I might have to try that." I mused, though I suspect my neighbors already think I'm a bit odd. Unexpectedly, he asked, "Mind if I see them? The roses, I mean." And even more unexpectedly, I found myself saying, "Not at all. Grab your coffee." We wandered out into the cool morning air. Our backyard isn't huge, but it's my sanctuary. I pointed out the different varieties, explained my ongoing battle with black spot, the triumph of a particularly vibrant bloom. David listened attentively, asking questions that showed he was actually paying attention, not just being polite. He noticed the small stone gargoyle tucked under the Japanese maple, the wind chimes I'd hung from the porch eaves. He didn't just see a garden, he seemed to see the care I poured into it. He talked a little about the rooftop garden project he'd briefly been involved with in Vancouver, the challenges of urban planting. It wasn't the guarded conversation of the previous night. He was opening up just a little, sharing fragments of his own experiences. We ended up spending most of the morning out there, pulling weeds side by side, trimming back the deadwood on the climbers. He had a surprising knack for it, his movements deft and careful. We talked about books we'd read, places we'd traveled, his extensive, mine less so but cherished, the changing seasons. It was easy, comfortable. The subtle tension from the night before had dissolved, replaced by a gentle curiosity. I saw glimpses of the man Mark knew, the thoughtful observer, the quiet intelligence, but also facets Mark perhaps didn't see or didn't mention. There was a pensiveness about him, a hint of searching that resonated with a part of me I didn't often acknowledge. When we finally came inside for lunch, leaving a pile of clippings by the compost bin, I felt a sense of connection that caught me off guard. It wasn't romantic or flirtatious. Nothing like that. It was simpler, quieter, the pleasant surprise of discovering an unexpected kinship with someone I'd barely known. As we ate sandwiches at the kitchen table, the silence felt natural now, punctuated only by the ticking clock and the distant hum of a lawnmower. I realized I hadn't thought about Mark or my library shift or anything else for hours. I'd just been present, enjoying the quiet company, the shared task, the unfolding conversation. David looked up from his sandwich, catching my eye. "This is nice," he said simply, and I knew he didn't just mean the food or the garden. He meant the quiet, the connection, the unexpected ease between us. And I had to agree. It was nice. Very nice indeed. That evening, Mark came home buzzing about a successful meeting, full of plans for a weekend barbecue he wanted to host. He launched into logistics, oblivious to the subtle shift that had occurred during the day. David retreated slightly, letting Mark take center stage, offering quiet contributions, but largely observing again. I found myself watching David, noticing the way his gaze lingered on Mark's enthusiastic gestures, a complex mix of affection and something else. Wistfulness in his eyes. After dinner, Mark got absorbed in a phone call with one of our kids, discussing travel plans for the holidays. David had picked up one of the books from my book club pile, a novel about navigating midlife changes, and was leafing through it near the fireplace. I was ostensibly reading the newspaper, but my attention kept drifting. The comfortable quiet of the morning felt distant now, replaced by the familiar domestic bustle. "He never stops, does he?" David commented softly, glancing towards Mark, who was pacing in the hallway, deep in conversation. "He has a lot of energy," I agreed, folding the paper. "Always has." "It's good," David said, though his tone was flat. He closed the book and placed it carefully back on the stack. "He seems settled, knows what he wants." There was an undercurrent I couldn't quite decipher. Was it admiration? Envy? He walked over to the window, looking out into the darkness again, much like the first night. The reflection showed his face, etched with shadows from the dim lamp beside me. "Is it enough?" he asked, so quietly I wasn't sure I'd heard him right. His back was still to me. "Is what enough?" I asked, my voice equally low. He turned, his expression open, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. The careful mask was gone. This life, the routine, the predictability, knowing what tomorrow brings. Is it fulfilling? Deep down, the question hung in the air between us, shockingly direct. It wasn't accusatory, just raw curiosity, perhaps tinged with his own uncertainty. It touched a nerve, a question I occasionally asked myself in the quiet hours but rarely voiced. I hesitated, unsure how to answer or how much truth to offer. Mark's voice drifted in from the hall, loud and cheerful. David's gaze met mine, searching. Sometimes, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. Sometimes it feels incredibly safe and comfortable. Other times I wonder about the roads not taken. I hadn't meant to say it, but the words tumbled out, prompted by the unexpected intimacy of his question, the shared, quiet space. David held my gaze. He didn't look shocked or judgmental. He simply nodded, a profound understanding passing between us. It felt like he saw right through the contented facade to the flicker of restlessness beneath. "The what-ifs," he murmured. "They can be loud, can't they?" In that moment, something profound shifted. It wasn't about Mark or our marriage, not really. It was about the shared human experience of questioning, of wondering, of acknowledging the paths chosen and unchosen. He wasn't judging my life. He was seeing his own questions reflected in my hesitant admission. He took a step closer, not threateningly, just closing the distance slightly. "You seem like someone who feels things deeply, Sarah," he said, his voice gentle. "Mark, he lives more on the surface sometimes. It's not a bad thing, just different." It was an observation, stated plainly, but it landed with the force of revelation. Someone else saw it. Someone understood that quiet depth I often felt went unnoticed, even by the person closest to me. It wasn't a criticism of Mark, whom David clearly loved, but an acknowledgement of me. A wave of emotion washed over me, gratitude, surprise, a strange sense of being truly seen for the first time in a long while. Tears pricked my eyes, unexpectedly. David didn't recoil or look away. He just stood there, his presence steady, offering silent support. He reached out, not to touch me physically, but as if offering an anchor in that sudden emotional surge. His hand hovered in the space between us for a moment before dropping back to his side. It was a shared moment of pure, unadulterated emotional honesty, completely unexpected. We hadn't crossed any physical lines, but the connection felt incredibly deep, forged in shared vulnerability and mutual respect. Mark finished his call and came back into the room, oblivious. "Everything okay?" he asked, looking between us. David gave a small, noncommittal nod. "Just talking," I said, finding my voice, managing a smile. "Just catching up." The intensity of the moment lingered in the air, a silent secret shared between David and me, an unexpected deepening of a connection I never could have predicted. David left 2 days later. The morning of his departure was bright and crisp, autumn leaves swirling across the lawn. The farewells were perfectly normal on the surface. Mark gave him a bare hug, clapping him on the back, extracting promises for more frequent visits. David smiled, thanked me graciously for my hospitality, his gaze meeting mine briefly, holding that shared understanding from the night by the fireplace. There was no awkwardness, no lingering tension, just a quiet acknowledgement of the unexpected connection we'd formed. As his rental car pulled away from the curb, disappearing around the corner, Mark sighed contentedly. "Good visit," he declared, wrapping an arm around my shoulders as we stood on the porch. "Really good to see Dave." "Yes," I agreed, leaning into him. It was. Mark went inside to get ready for work, already shifting gears back to his routine. I lingered on the porch for a few moments longer, breathing in the cool air. The visit hadn't unfolded at all as I'd expected. Nothing dramatic had happened in the conventional sense. No explosive arguments, no grand declarations, certainly none of the scandalous scenarios a clickbait title might imply. Yet, something profound had shifted within me. David's visit, his quiet observations, his unexpected vulnerability, had held up a mirror to my own life. His question, "Is it enough?" echoed not as a judgment, but as a validation of my own occasional, unspoken queries. That moment of shared honesty, the feeling of being truly seen and understood by someone I barely knew, had been startlingly powerful. It wasn't about wanting a different life or being unhappy with Mark. I loved my husband, our history, the comfortable world we'd built. But David, the perpetual wanderer, had inadvertently reminded me of the parts of myself that existed outside that shared world. The contemplative side, the woman who still sometimes wondered about the what-ifs. It wasn't about seeking something more elsewhere, but about recognizing and valuing the depth within myself, acknowledging the quiet restlessness not as dissatisfaction, but as part of being alive, of being reflective. In the days that followed, I found myself moving through my routines with a renewed sense of self-awareness. I spent more time in my garden, not just tending the roses, but truly appreciating the quiet solitude, the connection to the earth. I engaged more deeply in my book club discussions, less hesitant to share my own interpretations. I even started journaling a little, exploring those thoughts and feelings David's presence had stirred up. Mark noticed a subtle change. Perhaps. "You seem thoughtful," he commented one evening, looking up from his laptop. I smiled, just thinking. He accepted that, returning to his work. Our relationship hadn't changed. Fundamentally, the bedrock was still solid, but my perception of it, and of myself within it, had subtly altered. David's visit hadn't caused a rift. Instead, it had unexpectedly provided a moment of clarity, a chance for personal reflection and growth. It was a reminder that connection can come in surprising forms, and that being truly seen, even briefly, by someone on a different path can illuminate your own in valuable ways. It wasn't the dramatic tale the title might suggest, but a quiet, internal unfolding, a deeply emotional experience grounded in mutual respect, and the surprising discovery of shared humanity. And sometimes, those are the stories that stay with you the longest.